Mary Crossan, you're a therapist, correct?
Correct.
And correct me if I'm wrong. That's the abbreviations is LCPC. What does that mean exactly?
LCPC is a licensed. I'm licensed by the state of Maryland, and so I have a master's in clinical psychology, and additional credits and experience that brought me up to licensure level for the state. And I've been working as a therapist in crisis intervention and with healthcare for the homeless for many years, and in different youth service bureaus and with families and couples for almost 25 years now.
Okay, we're here today to talk about what IPCA means. Okay, can you explain a little bit of what IPCA actually means?
Yes, IPCA is International Parental Child Abduction. And what that refers to is actually the act of a parent, whether it's before or after a divorce, where there's been some kind of contention with custody, actually physically takes the child away. That can happen, the I is international, and so they actually take them to another country, which makes everything more problematic because obviously they're so much farther away. You're dealing with, different relationships with countries now, so you have to involve higher levels of government.
Sure.
It is a crime, so you have that entire layer of it. Some countries have extradition laws or extradition agreements with the United States, some don't. So it becomes very complicated. And it's difficult enough when a child is kidnapped by a parent and they stay within the U.S. But it's just that international piece creates multiple complications.
So how does IPCA relate to parental alienation?
Okay. Well, parental alienation is actually the syndrome that happens. It's the phenomena that happens within the family after the child is abducted, whereas the IPCA is more the term for what's happened. So parental alienation is where you have the parent who, we'll talk, since this is more specifically about parental abduction, we'll narrow it more to that. But this can happen even when families get divorced or separated. It can be subtle to severe, and it can happen in families where there isn't a removal of the child to another location or another country. But the main thing to understand is it starts with the parent that is having an issue. And, they hold a lot of anger. So they will start to turn the child, they kind of turn their mind and their heart against the parent that they've divorced or they've separated from. And after a while, it is very much like brainwashing. All of the same features, all of the same processes happen in like a hostage situation. But it happens more, it can be gradual, but it can also happen very starkly, especially when there is kidnapping. You have such when there's a child that's taken away, especially to another country, that's a very stark change for them.
Sure, absolutely.
And so you have a child who all of a sudden, not only are they physically separated, they may be not just in a foreign land, they may not speak the language. Depending on who may be looking for them, there may be a change of identity. Suddenly the child is being told you have to go by a different name. They may cut their hair and color their hair. They may even dress them and have them pose as another gender.
Wow.
And depending on the age of the child, you can just imagine what the impact of that kind of, is very confusing. It's very disorienting. They don't know where they are. They could be in hiding. And it's just, it's very traumatic and can have very, very long-lasting effects on the mind of a child.
So is that what parental alienation is? Is that what the definition would be considered?
Well, a big piece of it, which I think I probably didn't cover as much, was it starts with the parent, okay? And they go through this, kind of brainwashing where they want to portray the, whether it's the father or the mother that they've separated from, as, there's something wrong with them. There's suddenly they don't love you anymore. Mm-hmm. They're changing the whole mindset that this child has to that parent. They may portray them as, abusive, mm-hmm. or that they're evil. And it can go to extremes. And, you have a situation then where the child then, after a while, becomes conditioned to believe this. So they carry it on.
Sure they do.
And they don't have a choice. Like, they don't have any recognition. They don't have any frame of reference that this is somehow a false belief. It becomes their whole world because the other parent who's taken them has created this world. So after a while, the child genuinely doesn't want to have anything to do with that other parent. They buy into that belief that that parent doesn't love me or that parent means me harm. And so they will be the one then rejecting that other parent.
So let me ask you this. What is the short and long-term effect of IPCA?
Well, as we were discussing before, it can have, in the short term, you have a situation where you have this stark change in the life of a child. And that can be very, very traumatic. Depending on the child and the age and other factors, how much hiding, how much moving around, how much instability the parent who abducted them, how much instability they create having to move them around. There's some factors that are at play. But for the most part, this child knew at one point that they had two parents. And every child is born wanting the love and affection and acceptance of two parents. So they feel that absence, even though there's all this turmoil going mm-hmm. on, and they're being told all this negative stuff, this dangerous stuff about that other parent. And on some level, they still, it's very confusing because
I can imagine
it's probably not what their actual experience was. Chances are, even though there are some cases, but relatively few, where there was abuse, but it's confusing because their experience was probably that parent did love them. And they now are like hearing, no, that parent wants to hurt you, and, you have to be this person now, and you can't talk to people. So it really affects how they see themselves. They get very depressed. They have tremendous low self-esteem as they start to get a little bit older. Right. The younger children can act out because they're confused, they're scared. So you can see a lot of behavior problems. And you can see regression. Mm. So, children, say, maybe 8 and younger, you may see reverting to bedwetting or thumb sucking or, behaviors that they long since outgrew. They may become very clingy and dependent, on the parent that's with them. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that kind of relationship is even fostered by that abducting parent. So there is a lot of turmoil for that child, and it's, they can withdraw. So even, say, the parent who abducts the child settles into a neighborhood and tries to get the child enrolled in school or, starts another life. But still that child may be very, very anxious and reluctant to go make friends, or they can't handle being in a school environment. They feel unsafe.
So, of course, what you're saying is how IPCA can affect them in relationships and mm-hmm. kind of, just the normal development that would have taken place, trust and just, connecting with others.
Yes, and if they're still on the move education-wise, they may not even be able to go to school. So you can see big deficits in education and learning, and they may be far behind emotionally and educationally than their peers.
Wow. It really is sad.
That's very tragic.
Children that are victims of IPCA, do they have a higher chance of being involved in crime and things of that nature?
There are a lot of long-term issues that follow along with someone who has grown up a victim of IPCA. And mental health disorders are very prevalent. They can, on an ongoing basis, struggle with depression and anxiety. They tend to, because of the almost irrational way that they're being raised, and usually they have a parent who has they have issues as well. They may have personality disorders as they get older. And they have difficulty with having a sense of self because that sense of self, they have a parent who really distorts how that child sees themselves. And then they're still experiencing the loss of this other parent and what that makes them feel like in terms of, most kids need two parents. Really actively involved to get a good sense of themselves. Not that it, in one parent situations that it can't be accomplished, but when you have a situation where you do have two parents and it is a sudden, rip away from one, then there's a scar from that. Kids who grow up and young adults, they will have trouble, like I said, with depression. They have trouble with relationships, which can increase that depression, that anxiety, that sense of loneliness and disconnect. So they can have more substance abuse issues. And, sometimes, as we all know, substance abuse can go hand in hand with various kinds of crime. So, yes, in essence, they are more vulnerable across the board to behaviors that are going to interfere with their getting on with having a good life. And it was really interesting. Studies are showing now that as adults, these people have a hard time. They eventually, even if they settle down and have their own children, they end up feeling that alienation from their own offspring. Even if they have a relatively stable relationship with a spouse, and that in the same scenario hasn't played out for them, they just can't connect because they never connected in a healthy way to their own parents. So it's still very difficult for them to have, that parental connection with their own offspring, which is really very sad. And it passes down generations.
Yeah. Is there other counseling? Obviously, you're there for people who might be going through something like this, but is there counseling available? I mean, good counseling in, it seems like you have dentist office everywhere. You have all kinds of physical therapy kind of, businesses. But are there any real businesses out there catered around helping people who are going through IPCA?
Well, that's going to depend on the area that you live in and what kind of resources are available. And, most areas internationally, you're going to really, you're going to have to search. And you're going to have to, if you're able to, if you're the alienated parent and you're trying to find your family and there's some level of reunification, you're going to have to really search to find somebody who's qualified because you're dealing with multiple layers of issues. And one of the biggest factors is how cooperative are all the parties. What is the mindset of that child, or by that time maybe a young adult? What is their mindset in terms of how they see the parent that was pushed away? How cooperative is the parent who did the abducting? There are horror stories out there where, they have fled from the police, they have tried to kill the child, they've tried to kill themselves rather than being, caught and just trying to get the family back on track. So if you still have the presence of extreme behaviors, counseling may be very, very difficult, because in order for it to work, you need everybody to want to be there and to be willing to do what's required to normalize and restore what that child's been missing or what that young adult has been missing.
What is generally the motive of a parent involved in IPCA?
Generally, parents who choose to abduct their own children are struggling with very severe mental health issues. They often have very malignant types of personality disorders.
Yeah.
They may have some other depression and anxiety, but more so it's the personality disorders that motivates this kind of behavior. And that is their own inner battle with this lack of sense of self. And this is a very, very complicated thing to try to explain. It's a very complex issue. But to try to encapsulate it, these are individuals that don't really have a sense of themselves. They rely on the people in their life to sort of feed them in a way emotionally. And if you have a spouse who, is somehow healthier than that person, or they perceive they're not getting enough attention, or there are breakdowns in this relationship, they will really twist this. This is really all about, them feeling hurt, and their perception of it is going to be very distorted. So they may really want to lash out at the spouse that they've divorced.
Mm-hmm.
They may truly feel like there's some level of threat, but a lot of times it's a distorted belief. So it's going to be very individualized, but it always, at the bottom of it, is always some kind of distorted belief about the relationship. And so they feel like they have to take this dramatic, step to take the child and take them far away. And, there's usually a relationship with that child that's overly enmeshed.
Mm-hmm.
And they really depend on that child to be their emotional center.
Right.
But what's required in order for that to happen is extreme control, and controlling their reality and bending their reality so that they adopt this belief system that the parent has towards the other parent that they've left behind. And it's indescribable sometimes, the lengths that some parents will go to, and the unreality that they've created for their children. But it's almost like there's a challenge and there's an emptiness in their soul.
Mm-hmm.
And they just have this very, almost twisted way to get that need there, get that sense of fulfillment. And it just unfolds this way.
It's very, very sad. Very sad. Is there any truth to what some claim that a parent involved in IPCA has, narcissism problems or personality disorders and things of that nature?
Yes, the personality disorders, there's a whole range of personality disorders. And the ones that typically will, that you see in this kind of situation tend to be the narcissist, the borderline, or the sociopath.
Mm-hmm.
And, those can be very strong labels.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand that, everybody, you can't just put a label on people.
Right.
Some of these personality disorders, they can be a little mixed, so you can have some features of, other ones mixed. So if you're a narcissist, you may have some borderline features or some sociopathic features.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's kind of on their own spectrum. So, they're going to be anywhere from mild, moderate to severe in terms of how severe their behaviors are. And that can be, somebody who takes their child and finds a faraway city and another, goes to another country, finds a relatively stable place and genuinely tries to, start a new life for their child and make it as normal and as possible, but just maintaining this belief about the parent that's left behind that, they're a bad person and that they really should not be trusted or be involved in that child's life. Then you have, it goes down the spectrum to the parent who, keeps this child in a sense of, fear.
So as time progresses with the child that has been abducted to a foreign land, what's their chances of recovering from something like that as they reach adulthood? It's got to be difficult to have suffered something like that at such a young age and then try to then lead a normal life as an adult.
Absolutely. I think, again, you always have to keep in mind that there are going to be a lot of factors that play into where that individual is in terms of the severity of the emotional abuse that they've endured, the level of trauma, and depending on what that parent that took them has, what they've gone through and what their experience has been, and if they've had any kind of normalcy in that whole time. And then, you have that the age is going to make a big difference, and if they've had any, how much contact have they had? Did they end up getting into school where they've had maybe some healthy contacts with adults, healthy contacts with peers? Those are the kinds of things that are going to factor into how much they can recover, because it gives them a basis of some, even just a glimpse at what some normalized types of relationships would be like. The important thing to remember too is what they're finding is even from young kids to young adults, there is a part of every child who's been separated from a parent that wants to be with that parent. And they want that permission to be able to be loved by that parent and to love that parent just as they did before. And I think it's similar to, you see it in survivors of abuse, adult survivors of abuse. In some way, some of them really truly cut all ties and move on, but so much more often you see that they try to keep some connection, and they want to honor that relationship. And like you see with kids that are told as they're older that they've been adopted, they want to find their parent. Right. There's a bond that I think is just inherent in all of us. We strive for that. We crave that connection. So there is always that kind of hope if, that young adult is still open to that, if their experience hasn't been so traumatic, if their reality hasn't been so distorted, and, even if they're younger, there's a lot of good counseling that's available. And the main thing that you have to do is, get that parent who's been removed to spend time with that young person and, show them that, what, everything that you've been told about me, it's not real. And you have to take it very slowly, and you have to be very sensitive, because on the flip side of that is the relationship with the parent that took them. And even though that young person may realize that at some point what that parent did was wrong, they still have a very, very deep love for that person. And because of that over-enmeshed relationship, they may feel like if I leave, if I get angry with them for depriving me of my dad or my mom, they're not going to be okay. Something bad may happen to them. They may fall apart. You know, they may need me as much as I've needed them. Even if it's just been this toxic connection, it is a solid and very emotional and very deep connection. So, you know, there's a lot of guilt. So there's a lot of complexity to this, and, you know, you do need a therapist that knows how to handle that, knows how to kind of pace it so it's not overwhelming, and also how to generate some opportunities for, you know, this recovering person now to create a healthy bond with the parent that they've been deprived of. And whether that's, you know, going out to the parent's work, say, or, you know, somewhere with extended family or friends, and just seeing how that parent is regarded, you know, by friends and other family and coworkers, that, you know, they like him. You know, how could he have been this villain if he's well liked by all these other people? You know, it kind of is a way to, without involving any confrontation or accusations to the abducting parent, it just is like a natural way for them to realize, okay, this is the truth about my mom or my dad. They really are a good person. I can trust them. And then you gradually get that the defenses will start to, you know, go down, and, you know, they'll want to spend some more time and build that relationship and build the trust and orient themselves to reality, really.
Wow, I mean, it's so compelling, it's so very touching. So there is still a glimpse of hope and faith there, rekindling or you know, making that connection happen again, even over long periods of time, you would say.
Yes. I truly believe and that is what is being found in these cases, where it's just, you know, even with the younger children who are still carrying that, you know, that parent who took them away, they're still buying into those beliefs, and, you know, they may say to their parent, the you know, alienated parent, I don't like you. I don't want you in my life. Stop calling me. There's a very strong belief, and based on the reaction of kids who've, you know, over time have been put in a situation to be connected with that alienated parent, that there's part of them that wants that parent to fight for them.
Sure. And
to just keep showing up and keep trying. Don't give up.
Right.
And eventually, you know, they'll get to see, wow, no matter what I say, no matter what I do, they come back. They must love me. You know, it begins to just show them that, you know, even in the midst of what they're saying, and they're holding tight to that belief system that's been ingrained in their thoughts, they really do want to believe that other parent is still very much a part of their lives and loves them. And, you know, and that is the truth. So underneath them, there is some sense that, you know, that we have a connection, and that's what they want.
So let me ask you, a lot of speculations say that parents involved in IPCA were escaping their relationships and their situations because of abuse within a relationship from their spouse. You know, how true would you say that is, and what's your take? I mean, what's your feelings towards that? I mean, obviously that wouldn't or shouldn't be enough for any single parent to think that they could just take their child and just, you know, leave, or
Right.
you know, go to a foreign land, or even just take the child and go someplace without the other parent's consent.
Right. Well, oftentimes, you know, you see that scenario, and of course, there are going to be situations where that's true. You know, abuse does exist, and there may be some situations where that's a matter of safety, and that's the primary reason a parent took the child away. Statistically, I think that is not the main reason. However, it is a reason that garners a lot of sympathy, and it's also one of those things that is very, very difficult to define, to prove in court, unless there is, unless there are circumstances leading up to the abduction where there may be physical evidence, or there may be a history of reports from, say, teachers or other family members, or the spouse, whether they've filed police reports or social services has a record that there were issues prior to the abduction. Outside of that, it becomes he said, she said.
Sure.
And,
Absolutely.
there can, and certainly even in those situations, like we see here in the States, unless there's tremendous, imminent risk of harm, the priority is to get everyone treatment, including the parent who, if there's genuine abuse, to get that parent treatment, and then to very slowly, very carefully, and in a very safe way, reunify that family, to the best of that ability. And even if it is just that the abusive parent ends up getting supervised visits, there's still then that sense of connection for the child, that sense of wholeness, and hopefully that, abusive parent is going to continue working and recovering from whatever it is that has created that abusive tendency. But it's in the best interest of the child. And, if in these situations where if there can be some level of reunification, or everyone ends up in the same location so that ties with the alienated parent can be reestablished, if there's been an allegation of abuse, it can, with good support from counselors and social workers, can be handled much in the same way, where you have a safe structure to, monitor the situation, and especially if there's a question, of, is this real? Is this a valid complaint? Having a monitored situation, supervised visits over a long period of time, and family counseling, couples counseling, even though they're not going to get back together, certainly, but they need to learn how to co-parent. And then, the child may need counseling individually. So there are certainly mechanisms to bring that issue to light, and to, repair that situation that, again, will end up being in the best interest of the child. The other, I think, the part that's very difficult is when the alienated parent is saying, absolutely not, there was no abuse here. There may be some way to define whether or not there was abuse, particularly, if there was physical abuse or sexual abuse. There may be physical markers, or behaviors consistent with that type of abuse. The thing you have to remember is this whole process has been so traumatic, and you have this whole brainwashing of the child. And with a young child, they will genuinely believe what that other parent tells them under the right circumstances.
Yes.
So if you have a child who truly believes that this happened, there's how do you can't really question that. It's going to be very difficult, even for the most astute and experienced psychiatrist or forensic psychologist, to make a 100% guaranteed determination about that. You may have a gut feeling, but with that kind of situation, most people are not going to want a chance being wrong.
No. Because
the result would be that you may put that child back in an abusive situation, and the focus, again, always needs to be what is in the best interest of this child. So there are some parents who commit this kind of, crime and take their child away, who are just that good. and they can create a compelling story. They are very good at creating plausible deniability, where everything's very iffy. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. There's nothing definitive. They're very good at getting people to buy in and help them out. And they, can create a good support system. So, it can be very, very difficult to really question that. And it's got to be really demoralizing for the parent who lost their child, because there may be a point at which you don't ever have to admit that, yes, I was abusive, just so you could get into some kind of program where you would, in some supervised way start to be able to see your child again. But you may have to just suck up the perception that I can't disprove this, she can't prove it, we're stuck in the middle, and if what I want is to have time with my child and have a chance at rebuilding our relationship, I may have to live with the fact that this is never going to be a question that's going to be definitively answered in my favor. And that's a real punch in the gut on top of everything else that's happened.
So, Mary, what's the general outcome in most cases? I mean, I'm pretty sure numbers are all over the place, and the actual number, the real number, probably isn't even a statistic. But what generally happens to the victims in the case of IPCA? I mean, do they come home a lot, or do these cases generally end in a sad type of manner where the connection is never made again?
Well, I think, from what we've talked about before, that there is always going to be, unfortunately, damage. There's just permanent damage in terms of the relationships among the parents and the kids, and just to the parent left behind and the child, in terms of being able to, even if they get lots of therapy and there's reunification at some point, there's always going to be residual damage. However, and I don't know what the statistics would be. However, I think, particularly with the international abduction, you have a situation where, you can fight for years and years and years. And depending on your resources, it may be a matter that you have to kind of keep the faith, and you're waiting for adulthood. And, that at some point you can approach your children, if you can keep tabs on where they are when they are young adults and they are no longer legally tied or protected by the abducting parent. There are a lot of cases where, the families are reunited, and I think it's a mixed bag in terms of the outcome. And again, part of that is depending on the level of emotional abuse that the child has endured, and how distorted their reality had to become in order for that abduction to kind of be maintained, and that child to buy into alienating that other parent along with, the parent that abducted them. So there's a lot of factors that are going to play in, but I think there needs to continue to be hope, because, like we were talking about a little while ago, that I do believe that kids, they do want, even when they're older, they want that affirmation, they want that connection with both of their parents. And if they have to try to approach it, maybe they'll go seek their parent. Maybe something happens in their life, they get to be old enough that they're out on their own, or they have their own family, and they start to realize, wow, I'm a dad now, and there's something missing. I really do now want to try and see if I can find my dad. and see if what happened to me was real. And they have questions, and they go on this search. So there's all kinds of outcomes, and sometimes it's just keeping that light in your heart going for your child, and being open if they contact you, or just going to look for them when you feel like they're legal age now. Maybe I have a shot. I don't have to fight the courts anymore. I don't have to fight my ex-spouse anymore. It's a level playing field. So yeah, it's very complicated, but I think you have to try to have belief in humanity, and that the ties that bind us. I mean, our parents are in our DNA.
Yes.
And we want them to be there. And I think the human heart can prevail, and we can find our way back to each other.
Well, thank you so much for this candid interview, and everything that you do to help the victims of IPCA.
It's my pleasure.